This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. A. Carter. Orthodoxy by G. K. Chesterton. Chapter 7. The Eternal Revolution. Part 2. This, then, is our second requirement for the ideal of progress. First, it must be fixed. Second, it must be composite. It must not, if it is to satisfy our souls, be the mere victory of some one thing swallowing up everything else, love or pride or peace or adventure. It must be a definite picture composed of these elements in their best proportion and relation. I am not concerned at this moment to deny that some such good culmination may be, by the constitution of things, reserved for the human race. I only point out that if this composite happiness is fixed for us, it must be fixed by some mind. For only a mind can place the exact proportions of a complete happiness. If the beautification of the world is a mere work of nature, then it must be as simple as the freezing of the world or the burning up of the world. But if the beautification of the world is not a work of nature, but a work of art, then it involves an artist. And here again my contemplation was cloven by the ancient voice which said, "I could have told you all this a long time ago. If there is any certain progress, it can only be by my kind of progress, the progress toward a complete city of virtues and dominations, where righteousness and peace contrive to kiss each other. An impersonal force might be leading you to a wilderness of perfect flatness or a peak of perfect height, but only a personal God can possibly be leading you, if indeed you are being led, to a city with just streets and architectural proportions, a city in which each of you can contribute exactly the right amount of your own colour to the many-coloured coat of Joseph." Twice again, therefore, Christianity had come in with the exact answer that I required. I had said, "The ideal must be fixed," and the Church had answered, "Mine is literally fixed, for it existed before anything else." I said, secondly, "It must be artistically combined, like a picture," and the Church answered, "Mine is quite literally a picture, for I know who painted it." Then I went on to the third thing, which, as it seemed to me, was needed for a utopia or goal of progress. And of all the three it is infinitely the hardest to express. Perhaps it might be put thus, that we need watchfulness even in utopia, lest we fall from utopia as we fell from Eden. We have remarked that one reason offered for being a progressive is that things naturally tend to grow better. But the only real reason for being a progressive is that things naturally tend to grow worse. The corruption in things is not only the best argument for being a progressive, it is also the only argument against being a conservative. The conservative theory would really be quite sweeping and unanswerable if it were not for this one fact. But all conservatism is based upon the idea that if you leave things alone, you leave them as they are. But you do not. If you leave a thing alone, you leave it to a torrent of change. If you leave a white post alone, it will soon be a black post. If you particularly want it to be white, you must always be painting it again. That is, you must always be having a revolution. Briefly, if you want the old white post, you must have a new white post. But this which is true of even inanimate things is in a quite special and terrible sense true of all human things. An almost unnatural vigilance is really required of the citizen because of the horrible rapidity with which human institutions grow old. It is the custom in passing romance and journalism to talk of men suffering under old tyrannies. But in fact men have almost always suffered under new tyrannies, under tyrannies that had been public liberties hardly 20 years before. Thus England went mad with joy over the patriotic monarchy of Elizabeth, and then, almost immediately afterwards, went mad with rage in the trap of the tyranny of Charles I. So again in France the monarchy became intolerable, not just after it had been tolerated, but just after it had been adored. The son of Louis the well-beloved was Louis the guillotined. So, in the same way, in England in the 19th century, the radical manufacturer was entirely trusted as a mere tribune of the people, until suddenly we heard the cry of the Socialist that he was a tyrant eating the people like bread. So again, we have almost up to the last minute trusted the newspapers as organs of public opinion. Just recently some of us have seen, not slowly but with a start, that they are obviously nothing of the kind. They are, by the nature of the case, the hobbies of a few rich men. We have not any need to rebel against antiquity; we have to rebel against novelty. It is the new rulers, the capitalist or the editor, who really hold up the modern world. There is no fear that a modern king will attempt to override the Constitution. It is more likely that he will ignore the Constitution and work behind its back. He will take no advantage of his kingly power. It is more likely that he will take advantage of his kingly powerlessness, of the fact that he is free from criticism and publicity. For the king is the most private person of our time. It will not be necessary for any one to fight again against the proposal of a censorship of the press. We do not need a censorship of the press. We have a censorship by the press. This startling swiftness with which popular systems turn oppressive is the third fact for which we shall ask our perfect theory of progress to allow. It must always be on the lookout for every privilege being abused, for every working right becoming a wrong. In this matter I am entirely on the side of the revolutionists. They are really right to be always suspecting human institutions. They are right not to put their trust in princes, nor in any child of man. The chieftain chosen to be the friend of the people becomes the enemy of the people. The newspaper started to tell the truth now exists to prevent the truth from being told. Here, I say, I felt that I was really at last on the side of the revolutionary. And then I caught my breath again, for I remembered that I was once again on the side of the orthodox. Christianity spoke again and said, "I have always maintained that men were naturally backsliders, that human virtue tended of its own nature to rust or to rot. I have always said that human beings as such go wrong, especially happy human beings, especially proud and prosperous human beings. This eternal revolution, this suspicion sustained through centuries, you, being a vague modern, call the doctrine of progress. If you were a philosopher, you would call it, as I do, the doctrine of original sin. You may call it the cosmic advance as much as you like. I call it what it is, the fall." I have spoken of orthodoxy coming in like a sword. Here I confess that it came in like a battle axe. For really, when I came to think of it, Christianity is the only thing left that has any real right to question the power of the well-nurtured or the well-bred. I have listened often enough to socialists or even to democrats saying that the physical conditions of the poor must of necessity make them mentally and morally degraded. I have listened to scientific men, and there are still scientific men not opposed to democracy, saying that if we give the poor healthier conditions, vice and wrong will disappear. I have listened to them with a horrible attention, with a hideous fascination, for it was like watching a man energetically sawing from the tree the branch that he is sitting on. If these happy democrats could prove their case, they would strike democracy dead. If the poor are thus utterly demoralized, it may or may not be practical to raise them, but it is certainly quite practical to disenfranchise them. If the man with a bad bedroom cannot give a good vote, then the first and swiftest deduction is that he shall give no vote. The governing class may reasonably say, "It may take us some time to reform his bedroom, but if he is the brute you say, it will take him very little time to ruin our country. Therefore we will take your hint and not give him the chance." It fills me with horrible amusement to observe the way in which the earnest socialist industriously lays the foundation of all aristocracy, expatiating blandly upon the evident unfitness of the poor to rule. It is like listening to somebody at an evening party apologizing for entering without evening dress, and explaining that he had recently been intoxicated, had a personal habit of taking off his clothes in the street, and had moreover only just changed from prison uniform. At any moment one feels the host might say that really, if it was as bad as all that, he need not come in at all. So it is when the ordinary socialist with a beaming face proves that the poor, after their smashing experiences, cannot be really trustworthy. At any moment the rich may say, "Very well, then, we won't trust them," and bang the door in his face. On the basis of Mr. Blatchford's view of heredity and environment, the case for the aristocracy is quite overwhelming. If clean homes and clean air make clean souls, why not give the power, for the present at any rate, to those who undoubtedly have the clean air? If better conditions will make the poor more fit to govern themselves, why should not better conditions already make the rich more fit to govern them? On the ordinary environment argument the matter is fairly manifest. The comfortable class must be merely our vanguard in utopia. Is there any answer to the proposition that those who have had the best opportunities will probably be our best guides? Is there any answer to the argument that those who have breathed clean air had better decide for those who have breathed foul? As far as I know, there is only one answer, and that answer is Christianity. Only the Christian Church can offer any rational objection to a complete confidence in the rich. For she has maintained from the beginning that the danger was not in man's environment, but in man. Further, she has maintained that if we come to talk of a dangerous environment, the most dangerous environment of all is the commodious environment. I know that the most modern manufacture has been really occupied in trying to produce an abnormally large needle. I know that the most recent biologists have been chiefly anxious to discover a very small camel. But if we diminish the camel to his smallest, or open the eye of the needle to its largest, if, in short, we assume the words of Christ to have meant the very least that they could mean, his words must at the very least mean this, that rich men are not very likely to be morally trustworthy. Christianity, even when watered down, is hot enough to boil all modern society to rags. The mere minimum of the Church would be a deadly ultimatum to the world. For the whole modern world is absolutely based on the assumption, not that the rich are necessary, which is tenable, but that the rich are trustworthy, which for a Christian is not tenable. You will hear everlastingly in all discussions about newspapers, companies, aristocracies, or party politics, this argument that the rich man cannot be bribed. The fact is, of course, that the rich man is bribed. He has been bribed already. That is why he is a rich man. The whole case for Christianity is that a man who is dependent upon the luxuries of this life is a corrupt man, spiritually corrupt, politically corrupt, financially corrupt. There is one thing that Christ and all Christian saints have said with a sort of savage monotony. They have said simply that to be rich is to be in peculiar danger of moral wreck. It is not demonstrably unchristian to kill the rich as violators of definable justice. It is not demonstrably unchristian to crown the rich as convenient rulers of society. It is not certainly unchristian to rebel against the rich or to submit to the rich. But it is quite certainly unchristian to trust the rich, to regard the rich as more morally safe than the poor. A Christian may consistently say, "I respect that man's rank, although he takes bribes." But a Christian cannot say, as all modern men are saying at lunch and breakfast, "A man of that rank would not take bribes." For it is a part of Christian dogma that any man in any rank may take bribes. It is a part of Christian dogma. It also happens, by a curious coincidence, that it is a part of obvious human history. When people say that a man in that position would be incorruptible, there is no need to bring Christianity into the discussion. Was Lord Bacon a boot-black? Was the Duke of Marlborough a crossing-sweeper? In the best utopia I must be prepared for the moral fall of any man, in any position, at any moment, especially for my fall from my position at this moment. Much vague and sentimental journalism has been poured out to the effect that Christianity is akin to democracy, and most of it is scarcely strong or clear enough to refute the fact that the two things have often quarrelled. The real ground upon which Christianity and democracy are one is very much deeper. The one specially and peculiarly unchristian idea is the idea of Carlyle, the idea that the man should rule who feels that he can rule. Whatever else is Christian, this is heathen. If our faith comments on government at all, its comment must be this, that the man should rule who does not think that he can rule. Carlyle's hero may say, "I will be king," but the Christian saint must say, "Nolo episcopari." If the great paradox of Christianity means anything, it means this, that we must take the crown in our hands and go hunting in dry places and dark corners of the earth until we find the one man who feels himself unfit to wear it. Carlyle was quite wrong. We have not got to crown the exceptional man who knows he can rule. Rather, we must crown the much more exceptional man who knows he can't. Now this is one of the 2 or 3 vital defences of working democracy. The mere machinery of voting is not democracy, though at present it is not easy to effect any simpler democratic method. But even the machinery of voting is profoundly Christian in this practical sense, that it is an attempt to get at the opinion of those who would be too modest to offer it. It is a mystical adventure. It is specially trusting those who do not trust themselves. That enigma is strictly peculiar to Christendom. There is nothing really humble about the abnegation of the Buddhist. The mild Hindu is mild, but he is not meek. But there is something psychologically Christian about the idea of seeking for the opinion of the obscure rather than taking the obvious course of accepting the opinion of the prominent. To say that voting is peculiarly Christian may seem somewhat curious. To say that canvassing is Christian may seem quite crazy. But canvassing is very Christian in its primary idea. It is encouraging the humble. It is saying to the modest man, "Friend, go up higher." Or if there is some slight defect in canvassing, that is, in its perfect and rounded piety, it is only because it may possibly neglect to encourage the modesty of the canvasser. Aristocracy is not an institution. Aristocracy is a sin, generally a very venial one. It is merely the drift or slide of men into a sort of natural pomposity and praise of the powerful, which is the most easy and obvious affair in the world. It is one of the hundred answers to the fugitive perversion of modern force that the promptest and boldest agencies are also the most fragile or full of sensibility. The swiftest things are the softest things. A bird is active because a bird is soft. A stone is helpless because a stone is hard. The stone must by its own nature go downwards because hardness is weak. The bird can of its nature go upwards because fragility is force. In perfect force there is a kind of frivolity, an airiness that can maintain itself in the air. Modern investigators of miraculous history have solemnly admitted that a characteristic of the great saints is their power of levitation. They might go further. A characteristic of the great saints is their power of levity. Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. This has been always the instinct of Christendom, and especially the instinct of Christian art. Remember how Fra Angelico represented all his angels not only as birds, but almost as butterflies. Remember how the very earnest medieval art was full of light and fluttering draperies, of quick and capering feet. It was the one thing that the modern Pre-Raphaelites would not imitate in the real Pre-Raphaelites. Burne-Jones could never recover the deep levity of the Middle Ages. In the old Christian pictures the sky over every figure is like a blue or gold parachute. Every figure seems ready to fly up and float about in the heavens. The tattered cloak of the beggar will bear him up like the rayed plumes of the angels. But the kings in their heavy gold, and the proud in their robes of purple, will all of their nature sink downward, for pride cannot rise to levity or levitation. Pride is the downward drag of all things into an easy solemnity. One settles down into a sort of selfish seriousness, but one has to rise to a gay self-forgetfulness. A man falls into a brown study. He reaches up at a blue sky. Seriousness is not a virtue. It would be a heresy, but a much more sensible heresy, to say that seriousness is a vice. It is really a natural trend or lapse into taking oneself gravely, because it is the easiest thing to do. It is much easier to write a good Times-leading article than a good joke in Punch. For solemnity flows out of men naturally, but laughter is a leap. It is easy to be heavy, hard to be light. Satan fell by the force of gravity. Now it is the peculiar honour of Europe, since it has been Christian, that while it has had aristocracy, it has always at the back of its heart treated aristocracy as a weakness, generally as a weakness that must be allowed for. If any one wishes to appreciate this point, let him go outside Christianity into some other philosophical atmosphere. Let him, for instance, compare the classes of Europe with the castes of India. There aristocracy is far more awful, because it is far more intellectual. It is seriously felt that the scale of classes is a scale of spiritual values, that the baker is better than the butcher in an invisible and sacred sense. But no Christianity, not even the most ignorant or perverse, ever suggested that a baronet was better than a butcher in that sacred sense. No Christianity, however ignorant or extravagant, ever suggested that a duke would not be damned. In pagan society there may have been, I do not know, some such serious division between the free man and the slave. But in Christian society we have always thought the gentleman a sort of a joke, though I admit that in some great crusades and councils he earned the right to be called a practical joke. But we in Europe never really, and at the root of our souls, took aristocracy seriously. It is only an occasional non-European alien, such as Dr. Oscar Levy, the only intelligent Nietzscheite, who can even manage for a moment to take aristocracy seriously. It may be a mere patriotic bias, though I do not think so, but it seems to me that the English aristocracy is not only the type, but is the crown and flower of all actual aristocracies. It has all the oligarchical virtues, as well as all the defects. It is casual, it is kind, it is courageous in obvious matters, but it has one great merit that overlaps even these. The great and very obvious merit of the English aristocracy is that nobody could possibly take it seriously. In short, I had spelled out slowly, as usual, the need for an equal law in Utopia, and as usual I found that Christianity had been there before me. The whole history of my Utopia has the same amusing sadness. I was always rushing out of my architectural study with plans for a new turret, only to find it sitting up there in the sunlight, shining and 1,000 years old. For me, in the ancient and partly in the modern sense, God answered the prayer, "Prevent us, O Lord, in all our doings." Without vanity, I really think there was a moment when I could have invented the marriage vow as an institution out of my own head. But I discovered with a sigh that it had been invented already. But since it would be too long a business to show how, fact by fact and inch by inch, my own conception of Utopia was only answered by the New Jerusalem, I will take this one case of the matter of marriage as indicating the converging drift, I may say the converging crash, of all the rest. When the ordinary opponents of Socialism talk about impossibilities and alterations in human nature, they always miss an important distinction. In modern ideal conceptions of society there are some desires that are possibly not attainable. But there are some desires that are not desirable. That all men should live in equally beautiful houses is a dream that may or may not be attained. But that all men should live in the same beautiful house is not a dream at all. It's a nightmare. That a man should love all old women is an ideal that may not be attainable. But that a man should regard all old women exactly as he regards his mother is not only an unattainable ideal, but an ideal which ought not to be attained. I do not know if the reader agrees with me in these examples, but I will add the example which has always affected me most. I could never conceive or tolerate any utopia which did not leave to me the liberty for which I chiefly care, the liberty to bind myself. Complete anarchy would not merely make it impossible to have any discipline or fidelity, it would also make it impossible to have any fun. To take an obvious instance, it would not be worth while to bet if a bet were not binding. The dissolution of all contracts would not only ruin morality, but spoil sport. Now betting and such sports are only the stunted and twisted shapes of the original instinct of man for adventure and romance, of which much has been said in these pages. And the perils, rewards, punishments, and fulfilments of an adventure must be real, or the adventure is only a shifting and heartless nightmare. If I bet, I must be made to pay, or there is no poetry in betting. If I challenge, I must be made to fight, or there is no poetry in challenging. If I vow to be faithful, I must be cursed when I am unfaithful, or there is no fun in vowing. You could not even make a fairy tale from the experiences of a man who, when he was swallowed by a whale, might find himself at the top of the Eiffel Tower, or when he turned into a frog might begin to behave like a flamingo. For the purpose even of the wildest romance, results must be real, results must be irrevocable. Christian marriage is the great example of a real and irrevocable result, and that is why it is the chief subject and centre of all our romantic writing. And this is my last instance of the things that I should ask, and ask imperatively, of any social paradise. I should ask to be kept to my bargain, to have my oaths and engagements taken seriously. I should ask Utopia to avenge my honour on myself. All my modern Utopian friends look at each other rather doubtfully, for their ultimate hope is the dissolution of all special ties. But again I seem to hear, like a kind of echo, an answer from beyond the world. You will have real obligations, and therefore real adventures, when you get to my Utopia, but the hardest obligation and the steepest adventure is to get there. End of chapter 7, part 2.